My captors felt no emotion.
And vibrancy was she, that all was new to her, imbued with a childlike wonder.
Show me mortality, grip of the infinite.
They sought novelties from far and wide ahead. Never sensed
Is this spectacular?
the last
Hello and welcome, Exiles, to my Bleed Rupture Raider with Bleedstorm. Now, Bleed has always been kind of in a rough spot for the past few leagues. Ever since they removed the Elder Bleed mod, they changed some things with curses around, they changed some things with Seismic Cry. Bleed's kind of been on the wayside. It hasn't really had much strong builds, and I thought, you know what, I want to try Bleed, see what I can do with it. I never really was playing Bleed builds when it was somewhat, popular, somewhat meta. So I think I missed the hype, and I figured, I'll try my hand at Bleed. And I wanted to also try out the Rupture node from Deadeye, which I've never used because it's like, originally when it came out, Deadeye, there were no Forbidden Jewels, and Rupture to me just didn't really mesh with anything else in Deadeye unless you're doing a bow-based character like Puncture Bleed or something like that. And even then, I still think it's rough to take advantage of. But what Rupturing is basically the node says, hey, if you crit with Bleed, you get this multiplier to your bleed damage, but the bleed's going to expire really quick. So this thing's like, I don't know. I have mixed emotions about it. One, it means you have to go into crit, or you have to have some level of crit scaling. That means you're going to be doing a critical, not critical affliction. You have to do a perfect agony setup where you are investing into crit, you're getting some level of crit multi, and that's applying to your damage over time, and that's like how you're scaling it. On top of that, you also have to scale a lot of duration. It kind of turns Bleed from a long duration thing that's easy to stack with Crimson Dance to a very short duration thing because it cuts the duration by about 75%. So it's like this awkward situation where you're kind of turning Bleed into more of a poison, and the idea is I was going to go for a lot of bleed duration, and I was going to get a lot of bleed duration with Adziri's Disfavor using the quality on things like anomalous deadly ailments for increased duration here, chance to bleed support, all quality. Anomalous has bleed duration as well. So between these two jewels, we've 100% bleed duration. With the mastery, I have 60% bleed duration. With Azanas using the temporal chains, that almost doubles the duration roughly. My plan was, if I'm a raider stacking frenzy charges, I can also lean into something like Usurper's Penance. So I'm kind of stacking a bunch of bleed faster, a bunch of bleed duration, and then hoping somehow I'm actually getting full 8 stacks in Crimson Dance. I don't know if I am or not. I didn't ever do the math. I was too lazy to, but point is, for all I know, you maybe could take something like Critical Affliction and swap it for Unbound Ailments, and you'll increase the DPS of the build because maybe I'm not getting full bleed stacks. I don't know. Never really tested it. Didn't really care to. Point is, that's what we're investing into. We're getting crit via things like Brittle Ground. We're standing on top of the enemy when we go up to Bleedstorm, so we pretty much always have this for single target. So that's 2 base crit there. We're getting base crit from our chest. We're getting base crit from Assassin's Mark. All these things add up to basically give us a decent amount of base crit. And then we have crit chance from things like Ungol's Harmony, things like our crit mastery from Spell Surprise, stuff that doesn't really take a lot of investment, but it gives us a nice base percentage of crit chance, and hopefully in the end, as everything shakes out, we actually do a decent amount of our bleed attacks are critting, needless to say, which is actually, I think, a decent way to have a perfect agony build. Whether or not this setup I have is really good or not, I don't know, but that's what I'm going for. That's the idea behind it. On top of that, I am pairing things like a Timeless Jewel plus a Impossible Escape, grabbing the Elemental Equilibrium here. I went for basically a jewel that had a decent amount of bleed faster nodes. I have 3 of them, and then I also have a percent fizz here. So that was kind of the tech to get us Corrupted Soul, which pairs nicely when we use something like a Ghost Dance with our Sanctified Relic. That means with all of our evasion from being a raider, when I have frenzy charges, I'll check my sheet in the map. I think it gets to around 60k evasion, which means every time we get hit, we get all of our ES back. So it's a nice little extra buffer of defense. It's not just a 4k life build. It's closer to a 5k EHP build, and it has full spell suppress and stuff like that. So it pans out defensively decently until you get to Ubers. Ubers are where you start to get slapped really, really hard because Ubers have hits can't be evaded, and evasion suppress isn't enough. At that point, you need evasion, suppress, and armor, or frankly, you could just do the swap here, swap out this, grab this, have 50k armor, have a 10k molten shell, cheese the fight a little bit. That is something you can do if you want to do Ubers on this. I have done just an Uber Shaper. It took me 3 attempts though, so overall, this character has roughly like 3 to 5 million DPS is my rough guess, and it's a melee character. You gotta be up close and personal. It does have a decent damage uptime because if you leave the Bleedstorms, they'll keep hitting and they'll keep bleeding enemies as you run around and stuff like that. So that is nice with it, but ultimately, it's still, you gotta get up and close and personal for a time being to do that damage. And on top of that, bleed, although we have a level 94 character, and what I think it's a decent tree. I mean, you can be the judge of that, whether or not you think this is a decent tree we have set up for bleed and bleed damage. Still, we're falling short of what would be enough damage to really say, yes, bleed can be good. I want to say bleed can be good, but I realistically can't. This character's not good enough for the gear and price. I'd put it roughly in the C tier. B tier's average for me. I would say this is below average type of thing if I was ranking it. A would be a good build I'd recommend, and S tier would be something like Hexblast, Mind Trickster, in my opinion. Stuff like that is how I'd fan it out. More needless to say, I got my bleed attempt in. I did an Uber with it. I did feared with only 1 death. It can do all the way up to feared fairly consistently, stuff like that. A build that has anywhere 3 million damage plus with some decent defensive layers is going to be able to take down all the invitations. The second you go into the Ubers, you kind of need the next level of build, and that would, in my opinion, would be probably a B tier build with some pretty good gear or higher sort of situation. So I'll give you guys a showcase of what this looks like running a Hydra here. Just give you another showcase of my thoughts while I'm mapping with the character real quick here. Ultimately, as far as bleed goes, I'm glad I tried to make a bleed build. I'm just a little bit bummed out that I didn't make one that's actually good enough to do Ubers on a consistent basis. I think Ubers would be a situation where it would take me multiple attempts. Definitely would be using, 4 to 5 to 6 portals, on my attempts on Ubers. And then on top of that, there's also the situation where, it can be smooth, it can be chill for mapping, chill for Sanctum, stuff like that. But as always, when I make these videos, I want to be clear that if I'm going to put the extra effort and put in the notes section for the POB and say, hey, this is a guide I recommend, I want to be sure that what I'm recommending is a build that people can play and will enjoy a lot, because it's got quite a bit of power behind it that it can kind of cover for mistakes people make or / lack of gear, right? This character, probably you start taking away the gear, starts to fall apart pretty quick, would be my guess of it. I am going to finish out this Sanctum though, because it's pretty good. It's pretty good for Sanctum. You can pretty much just put a couple Bleedstorms on each of the guards and just keep staying mobile and not really take too many hits. So it does do that stuff pretty well. Oh great, now we get a narration by Envoy. I've been running so much of Eater of Worlds, I forgot what it's like to listen to Envoy's dialogues. I haven't really done many of the invitations this league. I've just been full on Sanctum enjoying, so it's a little bit weird listening to him give me his 2 cents. And then we'll just cast Vulnerability. For the longest time, I was just using a Ungles with just some crit rolls on it, which might be the play. I'm not sure if one's better than the other per se. But I decided Vulnerability I think is more damage than the 100% crit chance. I would imagine it is. Maybe it's not. I don't know for sure really, but that's what it looks like in kind of like more normal standard content. It's a couple second boss fight. It's a 3 to 5 million DPS roughly is my guess. Sort of build. Pretty solid, pretty decent, but it just isn't good enough for me to say I want to make a full build guide out of this sort of situation. I know I've had a few of these builds in a row, but the thing is, when you experiment in PoE, that's always going to be a possibility. You're taking a risk on something you don't know. I'm not a guy that likes to look through and plan all my builds 100% through PoE. That takes out all the enjoyment for me. I'd rather play it, work through the character, have the experience of playing the character, because I still enjoyed having, like, playing this character itself. It was something different, it was something new for me, it was a different play style, stuff like that. I enjoy that, right? But ultimately, if I'm going to recommend it, it has to come through, it has to be good enough, and this character just wasn't to that power level. As always, hopefully you guys enjoyed the video, hopefully you enjoyed my plan for the character, what I tried to do, basically just going for a raider and then stealing the Rupture node. I think it worked out decently. I mean, it's still a somewhat viable character, but as always, that's just how it goes. Anyways, take care, Exiles. Thanks for watching. Peace out.